Greetings. Welcome to our second session for the spring term. We're going to be looking today at Genesis chapter 3, verses 8 to 24. I'm going to go ahead and give you guys an opportunity and pause the video and have someone in your group read that through as the rest of you guys follow along. Okay. We're going to be looking at this passage of scripture here today. And one of the things that probably became pretty apparent is that this is a very sad account of what happens here and the consequences and the fallout of Adam and Eve's choices. And we're going to be exploring that today. I wanted to start off by telling a story, and this may seem unrelated for a while until we get to the end part, but bear with me. And this is actually a true story. Franz Kafka was a German-speaking Jewish writer, and he never married. He never had any children of his own. And one day when he was walking at a park in Berlin, as he frequently did, he came across a girl who was crying, and he came up to her and asked why she was crying, and the girl told him that she had lost her doll, and she was very sad, and so he agreed to help walk around and look for this doll, and it was unsuccessful. They didn't find the doll. And he said, well, if it's okay with your parents, then you can come back tomorrow and we'll continue to look for the doll. And so they all agreed, and she left, and they met up again the next day. And he had brought with him a letter that was written by the doll. And he gave it to the girl, and they read it together. And it said that it told the girl not to cry because the doll had gone on a journey. The doll wanted to take a trip and wanted to see the world and travel. And so the girl wiped the tears away, and she was okay with that. Even though she was still sad, she accepted that. And of course she knew that it really wasn't the doll, that it was Franz who had written that. But then they agreed again to meet up, and they started meeting up frequently, actually, and each time he would bring a letter from the doll, and it was telling about the doll's journey and about the stories and the different adventures that this doll had experienced from traveling all over the world, and it really became this special thing for this girl, and then this relationship continued for a little while, and then one day, the letter was read from the doll. The doll was going to be returning soon, and the girl was very excited. And so the next time they got together, Franz Kafka showed up with a doll, and it was not her doll; it was a different doll, and that he had purchased. And the girl, immediately seeing the doll, said, "Well, that's not my doll. It doesn't look anything like my doll." And at that point, Kafka produced another letter. He pulled out and read it, and it said, "My travels have changed me." And in asking her to accept this doll as being different, and being, essentially depicting her as the same doll, but it's gone through a lot of changes and is different. And so the girl smiled and accepted this doll. And then that was the last time that they ever met. Within a year from that time, Kafka had passed away. And many years later, when the girl was grown up, she discovered that there was another letter hidden inside of the doll. And this was when she was a young adult at this point, and she pulled this letter out, and all it said was, "Everything you love will probably be lost, but in the end, love will return in a different way." you may see what this has to do, what this story has to do with the Genesis 3 account. Because Genesis 3 is the loss of paradise. Everything is gone. Everything that once was in all of its perfection is now no longer. And that is it's a very sad reality, and it's a reality that we still bear today. We still bear the effects of Adam and Eve's sin thousands of years later. There's still death. There's still, nature is not the way it ought to be. Human relationships are not the way they ought to be. But even in that story, there is a glimpse of hope. There's a glimpse of hope, and not that everything is just going to get reset back, but that there's going to be a new love and a different love that is expressed from God to his people. And what we're going to do today is we're going to just explore some of the consequences from the fall, some of the effects, some of the fallout, and then we're going to look at the hope as well that comes along with that, and that God has built into that story for us. And so a couple of things to notice from the Genesis text is God deals out consequences and punishment, and he does so very specifically for each of the beings involved, let's say. He deals out the punishment for the serpent. The serpent is cursed to crawl in his belly and eat dirt, which that's a very strange thing because that's what snakes do. So what does that mean? Does that mean that snakes, serpents were different prior to the fall? It seems to indicate that. As a matter of fact, from the text talking about the serpent or the anointed cherub that is present in Eden, the garden of God, it's talked about in Ezekiel 28, and it specifically says that it and he walked among the stones of fire, that he walked. And so there's seemingly a change that takes place resulting from the rebellion that the serpent was a part of and led. There's also consequences for Adam. Now, specifically, his consequences had to do with his work and with labor. Apparently, from that moment on, the ground was not going to produce as easily and as efficiently and as effectively as it was supposed to. There's going to be thorns and thistles, and there's going to require a lot of hard labor for him to provide a living, for him to produce food out of the ground. It's not just going to presumably produce as easily as it did before this. He's going to have to work it, and it's going to be hard. And that is a part of his curse to bear. And interestingly, when we look at these specifically, something that's kind of fascinating about just human psychology and the way that we're wired. This is kind of a generalization. This isn't true in every instance across the board, but in general, men tend to define themselves by what they do. So if you just meet a man, and you ask who he is, it probably won't be too long before he starts telling you what he does, either what he does for work or in his free time or whatever. It's very often labor focused and focused on accomplishments and abilities and trade, so to speak. And so it's interesting that his curse pertained to the way in which he would tend to identify himself and the way in which he would validate and see himself as a man. And likewise, Eve's punishment was relational in nature. So again, if you were to ask a woman, who are you? If you just meet a woman, she's probably going to convey who she is in relational terms. I'm the daughter of, I'm the wife of, I'm the mother of. And that's, again, that's an overgeneralization maybe, but it's kind of typical in a lot of ways. And maybe it's because we're sort of hardwired that way. But if you look at the curse for Eve, it had to do with relationships. Um, God said, I will greatly increase your pain in childbearing. Now, interestingly, childbearing there, um, we think of that specifically as the act of giving birth. But the Hebrew there is a little more broad. It could even involve conception of a child and that whole process, pregnancy, and birth. And so that's a very relationally charged punishment that is ascribed to Eve. That there's going to be pain, there's going to be sorrow, and that I think alludes to the friction that's going to inherently happen in relationships. And then God says something fascinating. He says, "Your desire will be for your husband, and he will rule over you." And that's a strange thing to say, and it seems as if there's going to be this increased friction now because of the fall, because of sin, in marital relationships, in male and female relationships. There's going to be this almost persisting struggle that's going to take place. And of course, we see that. We see that in our world. We see that in our own lives. That's a very real thing. Something else you're going to notice is, and this gets more to the hope side of things, but there is the way in which God deals with their nakedness. And this is fascinating because he doesn't simply say, oh, just ignore the fact that you're naked. God is acknowledging that there is a real problem now. And again, it's strange because they were naked before, but they were unashamed. So God doesn't correct that by simply saying, well, stop being ashamed. He acknowledges that this is a real problem, and he provides for them. First off, he does not honor their own coverings. So their own efforts to make themselves acceptable to one another and to God and to themselves, God doesn't honor that. The fig leaves didn't work. And so God had to provide for them coverings of skins. Now, what that implies is he had to kill an animal to provide that for them. Now, I don't know how much of that whole process they witnessed, but that would have been, if they actually saw the process of what sin does and the effects of it, in the sense of God is not taking this animal that is alive, and because of their sin, he is stripping the flesh off of it and turning that into an acceptable covering for Adam and his wife. That would have been, if they experienced that or if they witnessed that, that would have been a horrifying thing for them to see. And the reality of that is what? Well, that has a lot of theological implications when it comes to atonement, when it comes to forgiveness, that something innocent has to die. We call that substitutionary atonement. Something else has to die in the place of the actual transgressors, Adam and Eve. But also, when you think about, on a very practical level, sin often affects things that we care about, that are close to us. And when you think about the human relationship with animals, and of course that is now changing, but they were supposed to look after them, to take care of the animals. And because of their sin, apparently at least one animal had to die because of them. And now death has entered the picture, just as God said it would. And so there are so many things that now are a part of God's world that he did not originally want or originally intend to be there. And it is it's a very sad story, but there is some glimpse of hope. Um, Another thing that we see is Adam and Eve are driven out of the garden. And that phrase there for driving out, um, it is clearly a forceful thing. That phrase is used. It's actually used elsewhere. It can be used to drive out, like for instance, when later on when Abraham and Sarah couldn't have kids, and Sarah suggested that Abraham have a son with her handmaid Hagar. After a while, when Hagar bore Ishmael, as he grew up, there was tension in the family that because of that whole sort of dysfunctional relationship. And the same word is used when Sarah had Abraham drive them out. Like they can no longer stay with us. We can no longer share a space. So they have to go. Same phrase is used there. It's also used, that same phrase is used for divorce. It's the same word, which is interesting. So it implies that there's an intimate, meaningful relationship, but it is now forcefully being torn apart. It's being separated. And because of that, one party has to be driven away, has to leave. And of course, that's Adam and Eve. They have to leave this perfect garden now. And one of the things that's interesting is God placed a cherubim, or perhaps two, to guard the way with a flaming sword. So as if a cherubim with a sword is not terrifying enough, the sword is on fire. Now, to prevent Adam and Eve from coming back, and they were specifically being guarded from coming back to the tree of life. And there's something here that is fascinating. It says, so that they would not eat of the tree of life and live forever. And this opens the door for a lot of conjecture and a lot of speculation as to what that means. Personally, and this is just my opinion, I really can't make the case here scripturally. We don't really know exactly what this means, but I actually think that this was a gracious move on the part of God, because if, and again, take this for what it's worth, it's just my opinion, but if they're in this fallen state, if they eat of the tree of life and live forever, they would be essentially trapped forever in this fallen, corrupt, broken state where they're separated from God. And so it would almost be like dying but never die, something like this. And so I actually think God prohibiting them from eating of the tree of life and living forever in this fallen state, I actually think that was a move of grace on his part, because now what is our escape from this broken, corrupt world and body and sin nature? Well, it's death. We sooner or later will escape from that. Now, if we're unregenerate, if we're not accepting of Jesus and his salvation for us, then our situation does not improve at our death. It gets way worse. But because of that potential, now we have the ability, because of God and his grace, to potentially be freed from this broken system that we find ourselves inheriting from Adam and Eve. And so I do think that God prohibiting Adam and Eve from living forever by eating of the fruit of the tree of life, I think that was a good thing. Now, later on, of course, in Scripture, in Revelation, we find that in the end, God will bring us back into Eden. But is it going to be the same? Well, it seems like it's going to be better. Seems like it's going to be better, because now we are brought in because of this different kind of relationship that we have with God. Because before the fall, Adam and Eve did not understand really this absolute love and grace and forgiveness that God offers. Now, because of our situation and through the work of Jesus Christ on the cross, we can see that, and we can essentially accept his offer to us because of what he has done. And we can be invited back into Eden, where we share again, we partake of the tree of life willingly. And that's a magnificent thing. And so, just as with that story, everything you love will probably be lost, but in the end, love will return in a different way. I wish you well in your studies, and I'll be praying for you as you guys wrestle through these passages of Scripture. Thank you.